Joining me on this special YouTube edition of the podcast is Peter Smith, founder and CEO of Edgewise. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Glad to have you. So tell me a little bit about your background and how did Edgewise get started?
Yeah, I started my career as a practitioner of infrastructure and security. And that dates back about 2 decades now, running infrastructure and security for Harvard and DECA, later Oracle and otherwise. And I kept running into the same problem. How do you microsegment? It's a really hard problem. And there wasn't really a technology platform to enable it. And so I set out on a mission to make microsegmentation single click easy. And that's what we've done. 3 patents, 8 more pending later. Just a whirlwind of innovation.
Wow, that is awesome. So for our listeners that may not be familiar with Edgewise, can you kind of give us the 30,000-foot view of the technology?
Happy to. So really the net of it is microsegmentation that uses software identity to make control decisions. And this really is pivotal. It's a pivotal change in the way people think and the way we can actually do microsegmentation easily. We used to use addresses, ports, and protocols to make all of our decisions, but with the advent of container orchestration and otherwise, there's so much dynamic behavior in your environment that what really does an address, port, and protocol even mean anymore? And the thing that we need to focus on instead is the software that makes a connection and the software that receives a connection. If we apply policy to software instead of addresses, ports, and protocols, then independent of the addresses used to communicate, the policy is always consistent. It also serves as a basis for building machine learning generated policies. If I can see that a Java application talks to a database, I can validate that that software is legitimate and have higher confidence that the relationship is legitimate as well. And the machine learning system codifies those relationships into policy for you automatically.
Very cool. Now, let's briefly talk about a campaign that you have called Will It Defend, which kind of shows how Edgewise can stop a real attack. And one of those attacks that can affect enterprise networks is the Bluekeep vulnerability. Many people know about that. Could you talk about this vulnerability in particular?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Just very briefly, the Will It Defend is really just about taking real scenarios, real vulnerabilities, real exploits, and comparing what the available network technologies do. Will security groups, address-based controls, will they defend against a Bluekeep scanner? Will an NGFW defend against a Powershell attack like Norsk Hydro, something like that? It occurred at Norsk Hydro. And so we take these vulnerabilities and these exploits and we run it through all of the available controls, including Edgewise, to see, will it defend? So, Bluekeep. Bluekeep is a really interesting one. It's just so pervasive in terms of platform vulnerability from 2008 and newer that there was just wide swaths of infrastructure that would be vulnerable. And effectively what this does, there is no known exploit available today, but we've seen proof of concepts from Sophos and others where they're able to remotely invoke commands through the RDP protocol. And so what we did is we first used security groups to see what an address-based control would do. And as you would expect, if you're using an address-based control to say, let address talk to address over port 3389, it has no idea what the software is that's communicating over that. We apply Edgewise to verify that it's only the legitimate, for instance, Microsoft Terminal Services client. Therefore, we can stop all of the malicious scanning software and otherwise that would try to take advantage of Bluekeep. I'd love to show you if you're interested.
Yeah, I'd love to see a demo kind of showing that. And I think it's really cool that Edgewise will prevent a malicious attack from happening like that, but still allow legitimate remote desktop traffic. So let's see a demo of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'll get into the demo right now while I'm bringing it up. It really is important because administrators use these tools for both good reasons and attackers try to take advantage of that access for bad reasons. So it's not enough to just close off access. We need to really focus on only allowing the good stuff and stopping the bad. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
And we can see it.
Excellent. So what you're looking at right now is a system in one of my labs. And what we're going to do first is log into the Edgewise console, make sure there are no policies. Then we're going to run a Bluekeep scanner and a Microsoft Terminal Services client against a vulnerable Bluekeep vulnerable remote system. So we'll log into Edgewise. Look at our catalog of policies, which is empty. That's great. So now the only thing that's in place now is address-based controls. Allow address to talk to address over port. And in this case, it's the AD server talking to the remote WinApp Order 01 server over port 3389. The first thing we're going to do is use a legitimate terminal services client and connect to this remote address. And of course, it's successful. We brought up the system panel here just so you could see that it was Windows Server 2008, Service Pack 1, so a known vulnerable service. And then what we're going to do is run the RDP scan.exe. And just to clarify what this is, we took Metasploit, which has a Bluekeep scanner, which is quite effective, and we exported it with Venom, so that we have a standalone executable that we can run against the remote system. So we kick off RDP scan against the address of this remote system, 10.10.22.84, and what it's going to do is look for some key identifiers, got app ID being the identifier, which declares it as vulnerable. So what you can see here is the address-based control allowed both the legitimate RDP client as well as the potentially malicious RDP scanner to go through. So let's first start by just blocking everything. So we come over here, we're going to go to our protect, we're going to bring in the AD02 system, and we'll start it off just by putting some basic outbound protection on it. And this is sort of the sledgehammer approach, block everything, right? So we put an outbound protection, it queues to change. You can see inbound is set to no policy, internal is set to no policy, outbound is set to strict enforcement. We apply that change, and now that that change is done, we're going to come back over here and we'll relaunch our terminal services client and see what it does. I would expect this not to connect, and therefore, it doesn't connect. Great. Now, what about the scanner? Does it connect? As you might expect, it does not. And what I'm going to show you here is the positive feedback from the RDP scanner that it could not determine whether something was vulnerable or not. It takes just a moment. That feedback is no connection, timeout. So the vulnerability status of that remote system is unknown. But guess what? While we stop the scanner, we also stop the legitimate terminal services client. So let's modify the policy so that we can actually have our cake and eat it too. So what we're going to do over here is we'll just go into Policy Builder, and we're going to go down to the terminal services client, which you can see right here, mstsc.exe. And we're going to add our host, which was WinApp Order 01. And we're going to allow the access. You just click Approve. And that queues the change over here. We'll apply the policy. Give it a second. And while that's working in the background, we'll just go over to the client and try our test. It'll maybe succeed, but once the policy applies, it'll stop going. We'll do that by coming over here, doing terminal services, connecting in. The connection is now allowed. And then we continue with our RDP scan. And what does it come up with? What we expect it to come up with is no connection, unknown because of a timeout. And what this shows you when it does come, great. So what this shows you is that we can differentiate between legitimate and illegitimate software. So RDP scan versus the legitimate terminal services client. Now there's a little interesting point here. What if, as an attacker, I chose to rename that executable or modify it in some way? Would I get around the protection? And the simple answer is no. So what I've done here is made a bunch of different copies of it. So there's RDP scan.exe, modified, definitely not a scanner, definitely not a scanner, and Bluekeep scanner.exe. And no matter what I do here, I could say definitely not and put 10.10.22.84 and run this guy. And guess what? It's the exact same results. Now, here's why. Once this shows the positive feedback here, I'll show you how it works and why this is valuable. We've got really two scenarios. One is legitimate software upgrades, and one is malicious attacks, the attempt to bypass this protection. So what we're going to do is go back into the console and take a peek at the definition of RDP scan. So RDP scan over here has this little Stack Overflow icon. And really the purpose of this is to signify that there's actually multiple pieces of software that are being classified as RDP scan. So if we look at application details on this, what you can see is that you've got Bluekeep scanner.exe, definitely not a scanner, RDP scan, RDP scan, RDP scan. All of these things have been glommed together to represent this one object, RDP scan. So what about other software that's been upgraded legitimately? Here's another example, DNS.exe. This is the DNS server for Active Directory. If I go over to the application details, I see two versions of it. And these are all of the properties that we're verifying. We verify that it came from Microsoft, the version, the original file name, the SHA-256. We also use something called an LSH, and here's why. You see this SHA-256 right here that says 8914, and this one down here that says 36F8. Well, those are two different SHA-256s. They do not match. So how in the world could we determine that these were two legitimate DNS executables and pair them together? Similar to how we paired together all of these malicious RDP scans, even though they were different software. We use something called an LSH, a locality-sensitive hash, to determine the distance between two binaries. How similar are they? So I know that DNS came from Microsoft and they're extremely similar, which gives me high confidence to group them together so that you as an administrator never need to lift a finger when you upgrade your software. It just works. So that's really what we do. We verify this set of identity properties to ensure that it's only the legitimate software communicating and stop malicious software from moving laterally in your environment.
Really love the demo. So what other types of vulnerabilities can Edgewise protect from? I think, I'm just thinking of another administrative tool like PowerShell, right? That's used quite frequently in IT environments.
Yeah, PowerShell has definitely been a hot topic recently, both from a sales perspective as well as from a just sort of potential for abuse. And really, I think this extends to all sorts of administrative tools. But the reason I like PowerShell in particular is because it is one of the top mechanisms for moving laterally. Typically, PowerShell has a lot of broad access. It can leverage credentials to do a lot of things, just like WMI and other things. And the question always arises, how do you control PowerShell? PowerShell can do anything it's coded to accomplish. So it's not just enough to watch PowerShell and collect logs on it and send it off to your SIM, or even do behavioral analysis, because frankly, a lot of the stuff that administrators do looks like malicious behavior. So instead, what we need to do is actually control PowerShell. If you don't mind, I'll share my screen again and actually show you how we accomplish this.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. So you should be able to see my screen. And let's just do some basic tasks here. I want to set a differentiated policy for PowerShell for my entire company versus administrators. So what I'm going to do is create two groupings. We call them collections, app collections. And effectively, an app collection is just a group of software. So to do that, I go into applications, and I'm just going to say, you know what, I want to know about PowerShell, and I want to know about it on all hosts. And I'm going to save this object as PowerShell default. I save it. Now I'm going to make another one. I'm going to say, I want to know about PowerShell, but you know what, I only want to know about it on these two servers. I'm going to save that as PowerShell admin. So now that I've got these two objects, what can I do with them? Well, first of all, it's worth pointing out that PowerShell default will automatically update once I set this little flag here, enable auto update. And what this means is it will pull in PowerShell on anyone's device. It doesn't matter if it's a desktop or a server. And any policy I apply to PowerShell default will therefore apply to every instance of PowerShell in your entire environment. Without you lifting a finger. You provision a new system, automatically happens. So the way I do this, I'm going to go view policies on PowerShell default. And the default that I want to apply is that by default, no PowerShell has any access to anything. The way I do that is very simple. I've got this object. These are all of the instances in my environment. I simply come over here to segmentation protection, enable outbound, and I don't enable simulate block. I just let this do real blocking, and I apply this. Before I apply it, I actually want to show the before and after. So actually, I'll just apply it. It's simple enough. What we would expect is that PowerShell would be blocked at this point across the entire environment. So to verify this, I'm just going to go PowerShell. And from PowerShell, I'm going to run a command, test net connection. And I'll just do something that is, I guess I could do this win app order 01. It's the same system that we were doing testing on previously. I'll just run this guy. It'll wait for the response. And you can see here, TCP connection to win order 01 3389 failed. Let's do something else, which would be, I'm going to change this to port 80. And I'll do www.google.com. And again, TCP test succeeded equals false. Great. So PowerShell no longer has any ability to communicate with internal systems or to the internet. Now, what if I wanted to make it so that administrators could talk to any internal system, but they could not talk to the internet? Why do I want to do that? Because I don't want admin systems to be able to be used as command and control, but I want them to be able to do administrative work. So all I do is I change my target to my admin. So I go to PowerShell admin, set it as the target. There it is. And I say, I want PowerShell admins to be able to talk to local unmanaged, which is like addresses that do not have the Edgewise agent running on it, and all managed hosts, meaning everything that is managed by Edgewise. I click add and update, and I say approve that and approve that. And if I wanted to be explicit, this is actually not necessary. I could also add global unmanaged and do an explicit block on it. But it's not necessary because the default block on the default groupings would have already handled this. I'll just do it for visual consistency. You can see the policy set, and I'm going to apply those changes. What this is doing is it's gathering all of the identity properties of PowerShell, distributing them to all of the appropriate systems, and giving those identities access to all managed, to local managed, and denying the globally routable access. So this is going to complete in the background. Let's go back over here. Hopefully it's updated already. We're about to find out. So this TCP test succeeded equals false to get to Google. And now what about our internal managed system? TCP test succeeded equals true. So what this shows you is that my administrative system, which is AD02, it was one of those two objects listed right here, AD02, what you can see is that I was able to give PowerShell access to only managed devices, deny the access to globally routable internet while preventing access on any other system. And I did that easily by creating two objects, PowerShell default, PowerShell admin, and applying differentiated policies to them. And I can even get down to the script level. So for instance, I can take, this is an example of jars. We can apply differentiated policy on a per jar basis, a per Python script basis, a per PowerShell script basis. We get really low and granular so that you could give access to a specific PowerShell script while denying any ability for the interactive PowerShell to communicate in your environment.
Wow, that is really impressive, and I could see the huge benefit that security teams would have using something like Edgewise, because that is a huge problem, is how to stop lateral movement. And you're right, the majority of attackers are leveraging existing tools like PowerShell and RDP and other administrative systems to conduct their attacks.
And there's even some value here where you just want to do monitoring. A customer of ours the other day, they noticed an alert that said that there was a scanning behavior exhibited from PowerShell on one of their administrators' laptops. They looked at it and they said, oh, that's definitely scanning behavior. They went and asked the person and they said, well, yeah, I did happen to run a scanner from PowerShell yesterday. So they came back to us and they were like, it's really great that you were able to detect that. Even though it was not malicious, it was definitely symptomatic of that malicious behavior. And the beauty of this is that you can get all of that into your SIM very, very easily. So from a monitoring perspective, you get all of this rich data here, where if we wanted to say, I want to know about that RDP scan, for instance, that we were doing previously. These were all of the block events for our RDP scanning, and it shows you exactly what it was trying to do. RDP scan on 8002, trying to talk to system on win order 01 using these addresses and ports, and this is the policy that blocked it. Well, guess what? All of this data is available to your SIM by integrating our JSON outputs and ingesting it into your SIM, which takes about 30 minutes to do.
Yeah, that's huge. Huge just from an incident response perspective and logging. Really good. So I know a topic that or a particular data breach is on the minds of a lot of people, and that's the Capital One data breach. And now I know there's not a whole lot of information that's out on the internet about how it happened. I think, through the affidavit and some other types of blogs that have been out there, we can kind of piece together what happened. But just wanted to know your thoughts on how Edgewise might help prevent a data breach like Capital One.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to we grant access, identity access roles to devices in AWS. So, for instance, let's say we wanted to give access to a given listening service. You use a security group and you say, that host over there is allowed to talk to that address and port on this host over here. Well, effectively what you've said is any software running on that host is now allowed to talk to this address and port over here. That's kind of coarse grain, right? You're saying literally any software today or tomorrow, good or bad, can talk to that thing right there. Well, if you want to talk about the Capital One breach, you cannot separate that from the AWS metadata service. That's the service that is on 169.254, 169.254 port 80, where from any AWS instance, if you go to that, whether you use curl or otherwise, you're going to get all of the metadata associated with those objects. And inside that is tokens and interesting information where if your host has access to, say, an S3 bucket or something else, you could potentially leverage the data from the AWS metadata service to gain access laterally to things that you shouldn't necessarily be accessing. So how do we help you with that? That was fundamentally your question. And at the expense of abusing my screen sharing privileges, I'd love to just sort of show you, if that's cool with you. Okay,
absolutely.
Great. So let me, all right. So you should see my screen now. And what we can do is we can look at services that communicate with the AWS metadata service. So let's just start with a basic example. We go to Protect here, and what we're going to do is look at one of our servers. I'll just choose one at random. Let's call it your Bastion host. Now, your Bastion is the thing that connects from a very untrusted network into a secured environment. And if you're using something like the Amazon SSM agent, well, let's look at what that communicates with in our connection viewer. The connection viewer, SSM agent talks to a local unmanaged address. Which address might that be? Aha, 169.254, 169.254, port 80. Well, that's kind of a problem, right? What this is showing you is that there's software that has a dependency on the AWS metadata service, and anything on this host can now access it. That's a really big problem. How do you fix it? It's fairly simple. What we're going to do is leverage our default object, which is the all managed hosts object. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say view connections. Now this is looking at every device in the environment and every piece of software running on that. And it's going to say which of these things communicate with the metadata service. So this is a full topological map of everything that communicates in and out of our environment. That alone is pretty interesting, but let's get back on track and say, let's look at outbound paths from all managed hosts that are unmanaged. And I want to know only the ones that are 169.254.169.254. There is our list of software that communicates with the AWS metadata service. And what you can see here is it's EC2 config, you've got cloud init, you've got Amazon SSM, you've got this iExplorer. I don't want that, uncheck. Do I want PowerShell to access it? Well, not today, sorry. And maybe whatever service this is. And all I need to do is create a segment. So I can say create a segment, and I can say create a source, and I'm going to click the create button, and I'll give it a more meaningful name. I'll call it AWS metadata clients, and I'll say create. Give that a second to finish. Perfect. There it is. And we just need to update the screen. There it is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that these are approved. And now I've got a list of software that is allowed to talk to the AWS metadata service. And you know what? I really don't like curl being in that list. So what I'm going to do is go back to advise, and I'm going to say in app collection, AWS metadata clients, modify, go to the list of software, and curl is out, save, done. Now, this is the list of software that is allowed to talk to the AWS metadata service, nothing else. If an attacker gets onto these systems, any system in my environment, and they attempt to use any other software except what is listed here, it will not be able to communicate with the AWS metadata service, full stop. There is no other way to accomplish this, simply put.
Wow, that is awesome. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for showing us what Edgewise can do to stop attackers and prevent data breaches. So how can people watching this video find out more information about Edgewise?
Yeah, come to edgewise.net. There's lots of video and content about details about how we do what we do, some customer testimonials, and some entertaining videos.
Excellent. Yes, and we will have the video of Will It Defend from your website in the show notes as well, that our people watching can also check out.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
All right. Thank you, Peter.